Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm cognitive engineer and host ADHD coach Jeff Copper. Um, Recap, everybody. I've been on YouTube for a really long time. I release a video each week. I do a short, but I've been doing lives recently that are dedicated to a new intervention that I've developed called cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. It's an engineering approach to managing or helping people with ADHD solve problems, really via accommodations. Um, it is a paradigm shift in the way we look at ADHD, and like all paradigms, it's conceptually completely different. So it's very difficult to explain. So we spend a lot of time in this forum talking about many of the outcomes and some of the anomalies and some things that the model begins to explain. Number one, before I get into that, I'd like to apologize for my bad green screen and my microphone here. We're having some technical difficulties. Hopefully you're here for the content, not necessarily the aesthetics. We want to try to entertain you with content, but not necessarily just entertain you. So again, my apologize for the weird look at my headset and green screen behind me. So again, want to get in today and talk about cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. Today, we really want to focus really on impulsivity. And in the model, we define a couple primitive influences on executive function. And primitive influences are survival mechanisms. And one of them we define very specifically as an emotion. Now, often I ask people, what is an emotion? And their go-to answer is, well, it's a feeling. And well, for our definitions, a feeling is actually the physical manifestation of an emotion. All right. So if you feel something, that's actually an emotion. Now, you can have emotions without feeling anything, but for our purposes today, a feeling is the physical manifestation of emotion. But here's what's important. Based on the model, an emotion is a reflexive response. It's a reflexive response. So what's a reflex? Well, it's an automated response. You go to the doctor, hit your knee with that hammer, reflexively, your leg swings out. You ever trip? Notice that your arms reflexively reach out to brace your fall. Ever try to inhibit that? No, because it's an automated response. So again, emotions, for our definitions, are a reflexive response. It's a survival mechanism. Imagine that you're threatened with your life. Well, reflexively, you go to fight, flight, or freeze. Now, when your emotions are reflexively reacting, in that moment, you really don't even know who you are, what you're doing. You're on automatic pilot. Your more primitive brain takes over. And it's important to begin to understand that this is a survival mechanism. It's an automated response. And what's important is there's no objective thinking. Now, if somebody put a gun to your head unexpectedly, there's really no thinking. There's just panic in that moment. Now, in everyday life, you might say, I feel this, or I feel I have an emotion, and your thoughts are going through your head, but they're emotional based thoughts. They're not factual or objective thoughts. And this is really, really important. We begin to understand this. So at the end of the day, when I'm working with people, if you really want to begin to understand what your real motivation is, which is really based off of your primitive influences like emotions, is to notice your urges. Think about it. You ever scratch yourself? Yeah. Why you do that? Well, you're uncomfortable. Feels good. You ever change positions in your bed at night? Why? Think about it. Because you're uncomfortable. You ever have the urge to pee? Why? Because you're uncomfortable. The urge to eat? You want to seek comfort. Did you notice my head moving back and forth? Why did I do that? Well, on an urge to feel good. Like if you really pay attention to it, like almost everything you do is based off of an urge. You ever had your leg bobbling up and down? Why? It's an urge. Literally, you're acting on urges all the time. So let's tie that into the conversation today. If an emotion is a reflexive response and an urge is the physical manifestation of that, you'll notice is that the reason that I'm changing my position or scratching, I'm typically seeking to escape discomfort or to seek comfort, either way. So if I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to move to comfort. Sometimes I'm like content, but I'll go to something even more stimulating. Either way, it's kind of like a magnet. It's kind of drawing you in. So when we think about this in that context, it changes the game a little bit, because what is impulsivity? It's a reflexive urge to escape discomfort. Now, what Dr. Barkley did when he defined executive functions, that's absolutely brilliant. And by the way, let me pause. There's other models of executive function. I have a lot of respect for Dr. Thomas Brown. He's got a model. I don't care for his model because it has executive functions, but it commingles the emotion with it. Dr. Barkley separates it out completely separate. So if we begin to think of an emotion as a reflexive response, and impulsivity is a reflexive response, and to put this in context, to inhibit a reflexive response, like a first, what do you call first? I can't remember the name right now. First responder. That's it. The police, the fire, the Marines. Think of the Marines that are storming Normandy Beach. There's bullets and stuff flying all over the place. The point is, first responders have to go through specialized training to inhibit that reflex. That okay, everybody, don't panic. Let's all calm down for a moment, determine what we're doing. So this is kind of a heady conversation so far, but if we begin to look at an emotion as a reflexive response, and you begin to really understand the model and your own behavior via your urges, you'll understand that most of your urges are to escape discomfort. And so one of the things the models bears is, if you have ADHD, boredom is physically uncomfortable. Physically uncomfortable. In other words, it's painful. Have you ever been in pain? Imagine somebody whacked you over the head with a baseball bat. Like, you're in so much pain, you can't focus on anything. All you're doing is trying to relieve the discomfort of it. Now, certainly that's an extreme, kind of, but it's really not. Things that are repetitive, tedious, and boring are physically uncomfortable. And the point is, it takes a lot of cognitive effort, to sit in pain. You ever go to the zoo? See the tiger just pacing the cage? Think of it like this. The tiger is sitting there. It's so bored. It's so uncomfortable that that discomfort is manifesting as anxiety, right? So the tiger is pacing the cage as a soothing mechanism to relieve that anxiety or that pain. So people with ADHD, they're reflexively, they respond to their primitive brain. And I would argue that often people with ADHD, they might not be doing something that looks like a focus problem, but actually they're escaping the discomfort of boredom because it's painful. We also talked in, I think, our third live stream on this particular topic back in October, problem solving. I put up a table to kind of help you begin to think that problem solving is, we think, but really when we're talking about problem solving, we're not talking about daydreaming or worrying or contemplating or judging or believing or learning. We're talking about solving problems, which is characterized by things that are multifaceted and ambiguous. Multifaceted and ambiguous. So we've talked about when thinking is really, really difficult, or when it's uncomfortable, there's a reflexive urge to escape. Think about it. You got ADHD? You struggle with planning? Well, you don't do it. Why? It's multifaceted and ambiguous. Wow, that's uncomfortable. So what looks like an emotional problem, a focus problem, it is. But at the end of the day, it's an escape of the discomfort of thinking. It's an escape of the discomfort of thinking. So the way we kind of deal with ADHD right now is behavioral training. You just got to try harder. And I'll acknowledge that accidentally sometimes that's behavioral training will make the thinking a little bit easier, but consistently it doesn't. So if we switched from trying to think of this as a focus issue and think of it as, well, they're escaping the discomfort of thinking. Wow, the model is actually describing what Dr. Barkley said, that ADHD is an executive function impairment. Executive functions are a collection of mind tools that you use to solve problems, right? Well, it's impaired. It's painful. It hurts. So what we do is we're no longer just asking you to try harder. We actually recognize that we need to provide an accommodation for the problem-solving impairment. If it's not as painful, there's not an emotional urge to escape. So this impulsivity thing, if we begin to look at it, it's a reflex, it's an emotion. If you really start thinking about your times, is like a lot of times people, when there's a lot of things, they'll get emotional. You'll start screaming and yelling sometimes because it's like you're frustrated. Reflexively, you start to raise your voice. Even right now, you notice I'm talking faster because I'm excited because this is an emotion. So I have to calm down. But the idea is the model talks about emotion being a reflex. And we're starting to connect some dots with what we've had on some of the other conversations. ADHD is an executive function impairment. Executive functions used to problem solve, particularly inside your head. That is so impaired, it's so hard, it's so difficult. There's a reflexive urge to escape and go do something else. So this notion of trying harder would explain why behavioral training has its limits. We also can begin to understand why this is so difficult for people with ADHD. Like I said, first responders have to go through specialized training, which is interesting because people with ADHD, to sit there and to be training their emotions and stuff like that, it's not something they normally want to do because it's god awful hard. But the reality of it is that's what we're kind of looking at. So the paradigm shift, what makes cognitive ergonomics completely different, and we're no longer focusing on trying to get people to focus harder. What we're doing is we're looking at it as a executive function impairment, one of problem solving. And if we start to provide accommodations to make it easier for people to problem solve, then guess what? If it's not as painful, there's not that impulsive urge to escape that discomfort. And they'll sit in that a little bit longer and actually get something done. Interesting, huh? All right. So that was the gist of today. Again, I want you to notice that we're starting to tie in some of the other conversations that we've had about this. There's a commonality theme here that's reoccurring. So I'm going to pause here for a second and see by chance if we've got anybody on the line. And by the way, I'm varying days and times just to see what's convenient. I still think the majority of people are watching us at times when we're not doing lives. But anyway, this is a little bit of an experiment. So by chance, Pam, do we have anybody with any questions as of now?
Nope, no questions yet.
All right. Well, we don't have any questions. We're going to let it go, at least for the people. Thoughts on this? Comments? Does this make some sense to you? The logical sense. Oh, by the way, something related. We've talked about before. There's a correlation between uncertainty and avoidance. Uncertainty and avoidance. Problem solving is about things that are multifaceted and ambiguous. Ambiguity and uncertainty. There's a correlation there. Oh my God, there's a correlation between clarity and motivation. All right. So if you don't really know what's going on, there's a correlation between avoidance reflexively, that would be an escape, kind of talking about the same thing, right? It's just different vernacular. It's really the same thing. So anyway, oh, I think we got somebody on. Oh, thank you very much. If you appreciate it, I appreciate you guys kind of joining us. And again, oh, by the way, one of the reasons that we're doing this is a paradigm. It goes against a lot of what conventional wisdom is saying, and we're trying to educate people to get the word out. If you believe the current interventions are working, you're probably not going to get much out of this. But if you recognize the current interventions are fall short and you want to know why, again, we're sharing this because Dr. Barkley's model, it's absolutely incredible because all this stuff is derived off of him. All I did is study it and try to translate it into coaching. So with that, Pam, if we don't have anybody else, right?
We don't.
Right. We're going to have another live next week. Go check our website for that, and we will catch you later. Thanks for your time. Take care. Bye-bye.